Dallas. My father was the pastor at First Baptist Clinton in the 80s. That's where I was married, so that will always hold a special place in my heart. And then when my husband got his first pastorate, he was in Salemburg, and so we loved our time there. I also lived in Lillington for a while as a child, as a preacher's daughter, so I have been around this area. But I was 10 years old when I was in Lillington, and I was in a GA class on a Wednesday night, and we were talking about missions, and I really did hear the voice of God. I know people sometimes say that, God, they've never heard his voice, but I heard in a very clear voice that God was calling me to missions, and he was calling me to Africa. And that was very, very strong in my mind. I went through college, I went through seminary, all with the purpose of I knew I was going to Africa. In fact, I was dating somebody that wasn't interested in missions, and I had no idea that that person wanted to marry me, took me to a lovely restaurant, got on his knee with a ring, and I had to say no because they did not want to be a missionary. I just knew that that was what I was going to do, whether I was single or what. I had been called, and I knew that if I disobeyed, it would be serious. So I had to tell that person no. So I was really, really called when I was 10 years old. When we were in Salemburg, my husband was going to go as a church planter, pastor, missionary. That's what most missionaries do. And it was in the 90s, we went to a WMU rally, an associational WMU rally, and there was a missionary couple there, and he did agriculture. And as my husband sat there, his eyes just got really big, and he just said, that is what I was called to be. My husband grew up in Alabama on a pig farm, a hog farm, and he just loves farming. Even now, this afternoon, I was putting up vegetables. I still have vegetables in my garden. My husband is just a farmer at heart. And when he heard that you could combine feeding people physically with feeding people spiritually, he thought, that is what I want to do. So while we were at Salemburg, he had to go to the deacons as the full-time pastor and say, I already have a bachelor's degree, I already have a master's degree, but I now want to go to ag school. I have missed my calling. So he went to Samson, it was called Samson Tech then, and started taking the chemistry and all the things that he was going to need to transfer to NC State. So that is kind of our story. We really thought we went to Salemburg, and the International Mission Board said, preach there for just a couple of years, get some experience, and then we will send you to Africa. But while we were there, all of our plans changed as God called us. So we were called to the country of Mozambique. Mozambique at the time was known as the poorest country in the world. It had been in a terrible civil war, and the people were literally starving to death. We don't understand hunger. You and I, if we miss a meal, we say, I'm about to starve to death. But we really don't know what it's like to have a freezer. I've got 2 freezers full of food. I've got a garden. We do not understand hunger, and that was my husband, and that was our mission, was to help people to have enough food. Because what happens if you have to grow everything that you eat? Then you have to be able to, when the harvest comes, you have to be able to gather your crops, and then you have to store them away from the rats and everything, without electricity, without anything. You've got to store it and ration it until the next harvest comes. Well, what happens after about 9 months of eating what you have stored, you run out. You've given some away, the harvest wasn't enough, and that's when they die. They die right before it's time for the harvest because they didn't plan accordingly and have enough food. So we were regularly, mothers would come to our house with their babies with the extended stomachs, and it was absolutely heartbreaking to live there. While we were there, we were so happy to be on the prayer calendar. We were sick a lot with malaria, very sick. We were robbed 10 times. My husband had 2 car accidents. because in the roads are not made for cars. The roads are made for people to walk and for goats and chickens and children to walk in the road, drunks, the mentally ill. There's nowhere for the mentally ill to go. So the road that you're trying to drive down is also, everybody else is there. So he had 2 accidents where people hit him. They didn't die, but very, very traumatic time. And so when missionaries ask for your prayer, they're serious. I mean, our very lives were dependent on people praying for us. We got packages, we got volunteers, and that was a wonderful 5 years. We felt so called there, but my husband kept getting malaria. With malaria, it's from mosquitoes, and you can take the prophylaxis, the medicine, but it doesn't mean you're not going to still get it. It's just going to maybe be a lesser case. But after 18 times of being sick, and it's like about a month of the worst flu you can ever imagine. So out of 5 years, for 18 months of those, he was pretty much in bed. Vomiting, nausea, just horrible fevers, headaches. So finally, we were willing to stay there because eventually your body will get used to the malaria, but obviously his wasn't going to get used to it. So the International Mission Board said, you have got to leave. If you do not leave, we're going to bury you here, and we don't want to do that. But people were so hungry for the gospel. They would ride a bike for 8 hours just to hear him talk about the Bible. They would drive for 8 hours we gave away glasses, we gave away medicine, we gave away baby formula, we gave away Bibles, and they would just ride all day just to get a Bible. We just did not want to leave there because of that hunger that we had seen. So I want to show you where we ended up going. We ended up having to move to South Africa because it is a country near where we were that has no malaria. And what that means is it's wealthier, it's eradicated the mosquitoes. That's what it means. So this is called Table Mountain. It is the beautiful mountain that it's in the center of our town. 5 million people live around that mountain. And I lived there for 8 years. Michael, Patricia's son, came on a mission trip, and it was just a wonderful, wonderful experience. Cape Town is very beautiful, right on the Indian Ocean, so we have the mountains and we have the beach right there together. It's a lot like California, just a beautiful, beautiful place. That's my husband, the 2 kids that I raised on the mission field. They consider Africa to be their home. That's where they grew up. My daughter was 3 when we left. My son was 5. So if you ask them what they are, they like to say that they're American African. Instead of African American, they're an American African because they very much relate to the sports of Africa. They went to college here and went to a college football game and had no idea what was happening in that football game, because to us, football is soccer. And so they, missionary kids have a hard life because they come back here, but this is not their home. They're not American. They have lived another country. So we lived in South Africa, and as you know, South Africa had political problems, serious political problems. They had the type of government called apartheid. We have democracy. Some countries have monarchies. Some countries have dictatorships. Their form of government was apartheid. You have 85% of the people that are black, and you have 15% of the people that are white. They're from England and Holland. They came from England and Holland and said, God has told us that we need to rule over you 85% blacks. And that's what happened. And they separated the people. If you were white, you got to live in one place. If you were black, you had to live in another place. If you were white, you went to one school. If you were black, you went to another school. I went to Robben Island where Nelson Mandela was imprisoned. And they had on the wall the menu. If you were white, you had eggs and bacon in prison. if you were black, you had corn mush. The menu was still on the wall from when Nelson Mandela lived there. So while we lived in a safe home, it looked just like an American home. It was sponsored by your Lottie Moon offerings. We could not live in the areas that we worked in due to the crime. But I don't think I have a picture of my house, but it looks just like probably your house here in Clinton. But the blacks were forced to live in townships. Now, a township is like kind of like an Indian reservation. You know, you drive in, they put them all there, and they had to live there. So this is a typical house when Michael came. We did Bible schools all in these areas. They washed their clothes outside. No toilets, no running water. That's probably a tire on top of the roof because there's not many, nails or supporting. They just kind of lay tin, any kind of tin, cardboard, anything on the roof, and that's where they live. So then again, my husband loved gardening, and so it was a little bit different. The people, even though they were poor, they weren't starving to death in South Africa. They were definitely not, going to die of hunger. But this was an orphanage, and all around the crops, you can see little shacks. One's a green color, and then those are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 shacks on that side, and those are individual families. And but this was in an orphanage, and all of the children have HIV because of their parents. It's not a problem with homosexuality. It's a problem of promiscuity. It's very common for you to have many partners, and so that causes AIDS, and the children are born with that. So then their parents die. There's 32 million orphans in South Africa. So this pastor had taken in 20 children, and so we raised the food because he could not afford to feed the 20 children. So that is us, the beautiful Table Mountains in the background. I don't believe this is the trip that Michael came with. That's another volunteer. That's my husband, and all the children had been clearing the rocks. The place was just full of rocks, and so they cleared all the rocks before we planted. I would go to the orphanage. I would spend time reading with the children. Again, their schools were very, very basic, very underfunded, maybe 80, 90 children to one teacher, no books, anything like that. So I would go and help the children. We also were allowed to go into the public schools. So this is a public school in a township. Again, township meaning a place where the blacks were required to live. But this is a Friday afternoon. They let us have the last period of the day. And we had church on Friday afternoon at 2 o'clock. School got out at 3 o'clock. And they would sing till I just thought they were just going to. It was so loud in there. I mean, now in America, I work with a choir, and I'm always going, y'all sing, y'all sing. But these kids, they would sing praises to God with just all of their heart. And they lived for Friday. We were their church. There wasn't a church for them to go to. I went to several different schools. This is another school. We met in that brown shipping container, very hot, and I'm showing a Bible, telling a Bible story, and we had nowhere to meet, so we're just meeting outside, and I'm telling a Bible story. This is another time we're in a public school. That's my husband there in the khakis, and he's sharing with teenagers. We did a lot of what causes AIDS and abstinence, and how you need to keep your body pure for the Lord, and we did a lot of teaching in the schools about that. Maybe, okay. Maybe was that it? That is not my picture. I don't know what that is. It's like a green alien or something. I don't know. That is not my picture. So yeah, that was the last one. Okay. We saw that. Maybe that was it. Okay. Okay, I tried to, because I could just go on and on with all the pictures. So we were there for 8 years. We loved it. But the people were not hungry for the gospel. They were bitter about apartheid, and I would tell them, I'm white, but I didn't live here during that time. I had nothing to do with apartheid. Actually, America, we put sanctions on South Africa to get rid of apartheid. Our government helped get rid of apartheid. So, but they were angry at white people, and they were angry at me, and angry at us, and we had to do a lot to work through that. Never would ride a bike for 8 hours to hear us talk. Didn't want to. It was just very, very different. The crime was very bad. I was at one of those schools. I was sharing the gospel. 3 men came in with guns, put them to my back and said, "Give us everything." So I lost my car that was sponsored by Lottie Moon, and they drove away and left us there in this dangerous place. So that was very difficult. When they found the car, they had used the car in a drive-by shooting, and there were bullet casings all in the floor, and there was holes in all the windows. So that made me very sad, and also very glad that I was not killed, because that was obviously their intent. So we lived there for 8 years, and then it was time to come home, and our children were going to go to college. And my dad was sick. He had Alzheimer's, and we just decided that we just would stay. We would just resign. It was a very, very hard decision. We were there 14 years, all in all. But we decided that we felt like God had used us, and now it was time for us to be here. I learned 3 things that I just want to share about living in Africa. The second country that we lived in, I wanted just to say that racism is horrible. They still had the benches, blacks, whites, the water fountains, just like in America back in the 60s. And even though apartheid has fallen and it is free, just because of that system and because of the discrimination for so long, the blacks are very lower educationally because of 30 to 40 years of this system. So racism is horrible, to go to that prison and to see that people would get different food just by the color of their skin. Something is wrong with that. That was very, very difficult to see. Also, I learned that poverty is a cycle. And even now, we've got to find a way to break that cycle, because if you are raised by poor parents and those are your role models, you end up thinking that, okay, you're going to be just like that, and everybody in your family's just like that. And we've got to somehow break the cycle of poverty, and I greatly learned that. The last thing I learned is just the importance of missionaries. I tell you, the government is telling those children in the schools that AIDS is not caused by what it is caused by. They were saying, just do this, have safe sex, and just do this, and you'll be fine. If missionaries were not there to say, this is what causes it, and you are going to die without Christ, the numbers would even be more staggering. We need to pray for more missionaries because they're not being told the truth by their teachers, by the school. Last year, you may have heard that we had a budget crisis in the International Mission Board, and so the president had to write to all the missionaries and say, we need 800 of you to come home. We do not have enough money for 800 of you to be where you are. So whether you're in Japan or Canada or Mexico or Africa, we need 800 of you to come home. Now, when I left to go to the mission field, I never in a million years would have thought that I would have gotten an email that said, the Baptists just haven't given enough. Some of y'all just have to come home. I knew that I was there and I was going to keep getting a salary as long as I was faithful. I had no doubt about that. But last year, 800 missionaries got the letter. Some of y'all have to come home. And so ended up that 1,100 came home just to ease the financial burden. But I really hope this year that you make your Lottie Moon goal, and I hope every church in this area does, and I hope every church in the United States will give to the Lottie Moon Christmas offering. Because, guys, with the size of the world shrinking and how we're all affected by everything, if we don't get Christianity out there, you and I could possibly live in a Muslim world. We really could. It is growing so much faster than Christianity that our children and my grandchildren could live in a world that has Sharia law, and we just have to get the gospel to people, because the world is so small that we're all going to be affected. America's not going to be free like it's always been if Islam keeps growing the way that it is. The Bible says that Jesus went through all the towns and villages. Like I said, I lived in a city of 5 million people. He was teaching in their synagogues, proclaiming the good news of the kingdom and healing every disease. Like I said, the HIV and the AIDS, it's just devastating. You would go to a cemetery and they would just have little cardboard things on every grave. These people, they're 20 years old. They're 19, they're 27. I mean, AIDS is just wiping out a whole generation. But when he saw the crowds, Jesus, he had compassion on them because they were harassed and they were helpless, like sheep without a shepherd. Now, if you think about those shacks that you just saw, you and I, when we live in our house here in Sampson County, you more than likely have grass around your house. There is a barrier. You know, this is Jim's house. This is John's house. There, the children just run in amongst all the houses because they're all connected. So there's no girls are abused because there's no sense that girl belongs to Jim and they live in this house. It's all the children are just running around, and so the girls are raped and the girls are abused because there's no fathers. There's no boundaries. Those children belong over there. They're being looked after by that man. So children they're harassed and they're helpless, like sheep without a shepherd. Then he said to his disciples, "The harvest is plentiful, but the workers are few. Ask the Lord of the harvest, therefore, to send out workers into his harvest field." I know that we have a lot of things to pray for on Wednesday nights, but I tell you, I hope you don't just pray for sick people, because there are greater problems than being sick, and that is being lost without Jesus Christ. That is dying without Jesus Christ. I hope that on your prayer list that God would send forth more missionaries. My parents hated that it had to have been me. I'm the only daughter. My sister died, and I'm the only daughter, and it was very, very hard for my parents for me to move off. I didn't get to see them, but every 4 years, just think about Thanksgiving, Christmas coming up. What if your kids were in Africa, or what if your kids were in Japan? Nobody wants God to call their kids or grandkids, but somebody's got to go. Somebody's got to go, and we need to pray for God to send out workers into the harvest field. I want to share with you a couple of things that we at WMU are involved in that can impact all of you. WMU, I really wish they could change the name, because it's not just for women. We, of course, have the preschool programs and the GAs and the RAs and student groups. And so Women's Missionary Union is not a good name, but anyway, that's what it is for now. But we have a ministry called World Crafts. And it is just crafts made by men and women all over the world. And all of these men and these women are in groups. They're called artisan groups. So let's say one of y'all have a skill in woodworking, and you gather about maybe 10 Hispanic men or something, and you teach them some wood crafting. That's what an artisan group is like. You might have a beading or a sewing or a quilting group. And every one of these groups has an IMB missionary that works with them. And they make these products. There's just beautiful things in here. There's scarves and jewelry and wood crafting and toys and picture frames and just all kinds of things. But the problem is is that if you're in Africa and you're making some jewelry and you want to sell it, there's nobody that can afford to buy your jewelry. They're just all as poor as you are. So what we do at WMU is we get the products in America, and then we sell them, and then we give the money back to them because they're not going to sell it in their country. And so this is full. So I hope if you would take one of these catalogs and just look through this and know that you are helping somebody to buy food, and you are helping somebody to buy clothes for their children just by buying something in this magazine. If you get the white magazine, you will look through here, and for instance, this is a beautiful towel, a kitchen towel with a cross on it. It's made in Rwanda, and it's got a green bird by it. Every one of these items that has a green bird is made by women who were trafficked, who were prostitutes, and have been rescued, and now they make these towels instead of having to sell their bodies. And so I go through this catalog, and if it's got a green bird on it, that's just the one that I buy, because I want to rescue as many women as I can. There's 27 million sex slaves, and that's just too many. That's just way too many. Now, this Worldcraft catalog has the same things in it that this one does, but this one is only the women that have been trafficked. So this whole one is the same as this one. This one has those that have been trafficked and haven't, and this is just the ones that have been trafficked. As you know, we had the Hurricane Matthew this year, and we'll have lots of mission trips through WMU. We'll have one at Red Springs Camp. We will be repairing homes in Lumberton. Many of those families are still homeless now, and so we would love for any of you to be involved in our mission trips. We have them all in our magazine that is back there, and you would be welcome to read about that. Another thing that we do at WMU is we do a lot with prisoners, and I have really enjoyed that. We have a prison retreat at our camp in Camp Mundo Vista in Ashboro because we have a chain link fence around our camp, and it's we're able to bring the women prisoners to Camp Mundo Vista, and we have 3 days where we teach the Bible to them and have a retreat, and that is what some of your gifts to WMU are for. It's for these trips, these partnerships, and our prison work and other things that we do as well. I would be happy to answer any questions that you have about either the first country that I lived in or the second country, or do any of you have any questions? I just want this to be informal. If I have maybe not shared something that you're wondering about, what questions do you have tonight? I speak Portuguese. In Mozambique, the language is Portuguese. So we say como está, so that's very much like Spanish. Portuguese and Spanish are very close. And then when we had to leave that country and move to South Africa, we had to learn Xhosa, which has a click. And so it's very, very hard to learn. The words would be about, 20 letters, and there's clicks in the middle. So it was very difficult to learn two different languages. Sometimes I get confused. I want to just say one of them or something, even in America. So, but language is very important to be able to communicate the gospel with people. I just want to close with one story. I wrote a book about the miracles that God did for us there, and it's on Amazon if you ever just like to read missionary stories. But my child was very sick with malaria, and he was 6 years old. And I was just feeling like the worst parent in the world because I knew that maybe I would get sick or my husband would get sick, but I hadn't counted on my children getting sick. And malaria can kill you. Even if you've taken the medicine, it can go to your brain, cerebral malaria. And so he needed a shot because he was not keeping down any of the pills that you could take. I had learned how to do everything. I made my own mayonnaise. I permed my own hair. I cut everybody's hair. I could do all kinds of things, but I did not know how to give a shot. I should have learned that in America, because there was nobody there in our town that could give my child a shot. But there was one nurse in the town. She was from Holland. So we had guards. That was part of your Lottie Moon offering. We had men that sat at our house and guarded our house all night long and all day long. So there was no phones where I lived. So I sent my guard to the house of the lady from Holland to go talk to her guard and find out when she was coming back. I knew she was out of town. He comes back and says, no word, she's gone. We don't know when she's coming back. Well, Timothy kept getting sicker and sicker during the night, and I was just beside myself as to what I was going to do. We were praying. I sent my guard back to the house. I said, just go over there again, see maybe if she came back. She was at home, and she wasn't supposed to be home, but she was home. And so my guard told his guard to get her and to come quickly to my house to give my child a shot. When they walked in my house, the nurse that I knew, she was my friend, she had this man with her that I didn't know, this big, tall, white man. And I said, who is this? And she said, this is my dad. She said, where I've been is I had to go to the airport, which was 7 hours away in another country. I've been to the airport to get my dad. And she said, this is Dr. Van Heusen. And he shook my hand and he said, I'm a pediatrician from Holland. He came upstairs to my son's bed, laid beside him, prayed for him, patted him, gave him the shot, and prayed for him. That night, I just said, God, you have asked too much of me. You have asked too much of me. I'm going home. I didn't know that my children were going to suffer, and I'm not willing to go through this. Your grace is not sufficient. And God very clearly spoke to me. He said, I sent you a pediatrician from Holland the minute that you needed it. And he did. The minute that I needed a doctor was right down the street. Not from Africa, but he had been on a plane from another country. He was there in my house when I needed it. And that happened over and over and over again, and that's what my book is about. My son was bitten by a rabid dog. There was no rabies shots in our city. So the next morning we were going to get up and drive the 7 hours to where the airport is. There was a hospital. That night we get a knock on our door. A man comes. He's a Muslim. He's from our town, and he said, I heard your son got bitten, and I keep the injections in my house for my children, and I want to give them to you for your son. He said, you gave my dad glasses, and I know that I'm a Muslim and you're a Christian, but I believe that you serve a good God, or you wouldn't have given my dad glasses. And so here are the shots. They were worth $500 US, and he said they are free because you are here helping my people. So just when the time when you need 5 rabies shots, a Muslim comes to my house with the injections. And that happened over and over and over again. And that's what prayer does. That's why you need to pray for your missionaries, because they are in life or death situations. And so we're here today to testify that God is faithful and he is good. And I thank you for allowing me to share. Thank you for giving to the Lottie Moon Christmas offering, and I hope you have the biggest one yet this year, because we really need to get the word out that Jesus saves. Would you pray with me, please? God, we think tonight of the world that we live in. It's a very dangerous world, a world that doesn't know you in many countries. If people even wanted to know you, there wouldn't be a church or anybody there that would be able to share with them. God, we are thankful for the 4,000 or so IMB missionaries that we have. We're thankful for them being all over the world. Many times on the prayer calendar, all we see is initials. We cannot even publish their names because it's so unsafe where they live. We realize that they have children, they have needs, they have sicknesses, they have dangers. Would you protect them tonight? Would you help them to be effective As they have learned another language, when they're sharing the gospel, help them not to say the wrong words. It's just so easy when you're sharing in a different language to possibly say something wrong. Would you just help them to be effective communicators? And we realize, God, around us, where we are tonight, there are people that don't know about you. And we pray for this church to continue to be that lighthouse. Thank you for the ministries that they do. Thank you for the toy store they're going to have. Thank you for their work with the children's home in Pembroke and the other ministries that they have. Would you just set this church on fire to be a lighthouse here in Clinton and Sampson County? And would you receive honor and glory from our lives? We thank you for this time of the year, for Thanksgiving, for Christmas, for sending your Son, and we give you all praise and honor. In Jesus' name, amen.
You've heard very powerfully how God is moving and working in so many different ways. And I thank you so very much for sharing with us tonight. The question is, right now, while we want to reach out around the world, around the corner, right now the question is, what's going on in this room? You've never trusted Jesus as Lord and Savior. Won't you make that decision tonight? Won't you say, Lord Jesus, come into my heart, make me what you'd have me to be. Then set me on the path of service, which you call me. You may need to say, Pastor, a long time ago I did that, but I haven't answered the call. God may have even been reaching out in some way to call me in some special ministry that may have been across the fence at my home, may have been across the state, across the nation of the world. But Pastor, I haven't answered that call. In fact, Pastor, my life has sort of hit a plateau like that rock in one of the pictures, the mountain. Pastor, I want to get off of that plateau and have an ever-growing relationship with Jesus Christ where I can answer daily whatever that call may be. Maybe that you need to say, Pastor, I need to make this my permanent church home. Well, Pastor, I need to make some other decision known only to God. Won't you do what God's calling you to do? We have a hymn of invitation. I think it's 241. Breathe on me, breath of God. Breath of God was always symbolic. In fact, the word for breath in the Old Testament and the New Testament is the same word that is for spirit. Wind, breath, spirit. I'm going to ask that as we sing this song, that it becomes a prayer, that God would in a very special way enliven the spirit that He has placed within us, that we've already trusted Jesus. I'm going to ask that we then respond as He has to. Won't you stand with me now? Maybe stand.